What is game theory? At its essence, game theory is the science of strategy. How decisions are made when the outcome depends not only on your own actions, but also on the choices of others. It uncovers the hidden rules that shape interactions between individuals, businesses, and even nations, where each player is constantly adjusting to everyone else's moves. Imagine arriving at a four-way stop with no traffic lights or signs. For drivers sit there, waiting, watching, calculating. Who goes first? Who waits? Your decision in that moment depends entirely on what the others do, or what you think they'll do. This tense standstill is a perfect snapshot of the kinds of situations game theory helps us analyze. To make sense of such interactions, game theory breaks them down into core elements. Players, the decision makers. Strategies, the possible options available to each player. Payoffs, the results or consequences of the combined choices. Game theory doesn't concern itself with what's morally right or wrong. Instead, it maps out how choices interact, like chess, but where the pieces think for themselves. Sometimes these games are one-time events, other times they repeat. Some encourage cooperation, while others drive rivalry. Yet across them all, familiar patterns emerge. Bluffing, hesitation, trust, betrayal. These aren't just behaviors, they're strategic moves, and game theory gives us the framework to understand the thinking behind them. In short, game theory isn't about literal games. It's about recognizing that life is full of them, from job interviews to pricing wars to quiet standoffs at intersections. It's the language we use to explain strategy, decision-making, and the forces that drive human interaction. Why does game theory matter? Decisions are rarely made in isolation. You make a move, someone else reacts, and suddenly you're part of a system of choices. That's exactly why game theory matters. It gives us a structured way to think about situations where outcomes depend on multiple people's decisions. Game theory is the logic behind strategy. It explains why people sometimes cooperate and other times compete, why trust can form or collapse, and why even rational decisions can sometimes produce poor results. What makes it powerful is that it doesn't just describe what people should do. It also tries to predict what they will do when everyone is trying to outthink each other. This isn't just theory for classrooms. It shows up constantly in daily life. Think about standing in line. If someone cuts ahead, you quickly weigh whether to confront them. You consider the awkwardness, the risk of conflict, and whether others might step in. Without realizing it, you're already playing a strategic game, making decisions based on how you expect the other person to respond. The same principle applies to much bigger arenas. Businesses adjusting prices, for example. If one lowers its price, rivals might follow, shrinking everyone's profits. Each company acts in its own interest, but their choices are tightly linked. Game theory helps reveal when it makes sense to go solo and when cooperation, even among competitors, creates better outcomes. International relations follow similar patterns. Picture two nations stockpiling weapons. Each fears that if it stops, the other will gain an advantage. So both keep building arms, even though peace would benefit them both. Game theory maps out these dilemmas, highlighting the risks, motivations, and potential strategies at play. But it's not only about conflict. Game theory also illuminates teamwork, negotiations, voting, parenting, and more. It shows how people form alliances, strike bargains, and decide when to compromise or hold their ground. The goal isn't to manipulate others, it's to understand interactions more clearly. Game theory encourages us to think several steps ahead, to anticipate reactions, and to see how one person's move reshapes everyone else's best options. In the end, game theory isn't about right or wrong. It's about being strategic in a world where others are making plans, too. It doesn't just give answers. It provides clarity in situations of conflict, cooperation, or uncertainty. And that's what makes it more than a theory. It's a practical tool for navigating shared decisions with sharper insight. The Nash Equilibrium is a big deal because it reflects how real-world decisions are actually made. In most situations with multiple players, people don't decide in isolation. They consider not only their own options, but also what others are likely to do. John Nash introduced a new way of thinking about strategy by asking, what happens when each player chooses the best possible move, given what they believe others will do, and no one has a reason to change afterward? That's the Nash Equilibrium. a point where every player's choice is the best response to everyone else's choices. At this point, no one gains by changing their strategy alone. Take a simple example. Two coffee shops on the same street deciding between high or low prices. If both go high, they share profits. If one lowers prices while the other stays high, the low-price shop attracts more customers. If both go low, profits shrink for both. The Nash Equilibrium is the pricing choice where neither shop benefits from unilaterally changing strategy. What makes this so powerful is that it doesn't rely on trust, cooperation, or communication. It works even when everyone acts purely in their own self-interest. Importantly, it doesn't guarantee the best overall outcome. It simply identifies where things naturally stabilize when everyone is trying to maximize their own benefit. Nash's insight expanded game theory beyond simple win-lose games to a wide range of competitive, cooperative, and mixed scenarios. It allowed economists, scientists, and political analysts to model real-world behavior more accurately. Most importantly, it introduced predictability. When multiple outcomes are possible, the Nash Equilibrium highlights the stable ones, where strategies settle and constant change no longer makes sense. From business to politics to biology, the Nash Equilibrium explains why people don't always chase the absolute best reward, and why certain patterns repeat even when better outcomes seem possible. It's not about perfection, it's about balance, the kind that holds when everyone is simply looking out for themselves. The prisoner's dilemma is one of the simplest examples in game theory, yet it matters because it mirrors countless real-world situations in politics, business, and everyday life. At its core, it reveals a frustrating truth. Sometimes, acting in your own best interest leads to worse outcomes for everyone involved. Here's how it works. Two people are arrested for a crime. They're separated, and each is offered the same deal. If one confesses while the other stays silent, the confessor walks free while the silent one gets a harsh sentence. If both confess, they both receive a moderate sentence. If both stay silent, they get light punishments. Since they can't communicate, each prisoner reasons. If the other stays quiet, I should confess and go free. But if they confess, I'd better confess too, otherwise, I get the worst deal. This logic drives both to confess, even though staying silent would have been better for both. That's the dilemma. The rational choice for each individual leads to a collectively worse result. Trust could unlock the best outcome, but trust isn't safe here. This is why the prisoner's dilemma is so powerful. It shows how logical decisions can produce irrational results when coordination is impossible. And it's not just theory. The same structure plays out everywhere. In business rivalries, two companies might both overspend on advertising because each fears being outdone, even though both would benefit by holding back. On the global stage, climate negotiations face the same trap. If all nations reduce emissions, everyone gains. But if one country defects while others cooperate, it reaps economic benefits while still enjoying cleaner air. When every nation thinks this way, cooperation collapses, and all suffer the consequences. The prisoner's dilemma highlights how fragile cooperation is when trust can't be guaranteed. Even when everyone sees the better shared outcome, fear of betrayal can prevent reaching it. The problem isn't pure selfishness. It's the structure of the situation, which rewards self-protection more than mutual trust. That's why game theorists study it so deeply. It explains why competition escalates, why deals fall apart, and why smart individuals sometimes create collectively poor results. Its simplicity hides a profound truth. It's a blueprint for some of the most complex standoffs in human behavior. Not every decision is about winning or losing. Sometimes, it's about timing, trust, and how much risk you're willing to take. That's what makes the Stag Hunt and the Chicken Game two of the most fascinating models in game theory. They're not only about strategy, they're about how people balance safety against ambition and fear against pride. The Stag Hunt goes like this. Two hunters head into the forest. Each can either hunt a stag together or chase a rabbit alone. If they cooperate, they catch the stag and share a big reward. But if one goes for the stag while the other plays it safe with a rabbit, the stag hunter ends up with nothing. The message is simple. Cooperation creates the best outcome, but only if both people commit. The risk isn't in losing, it's in trusting someone else and having them fail you. This plays out in real life all the time. Two companies might plan to merge to challenge a bigger competitor, but if one backs out last minute, the other is left vulnerable. Or two colleagues might agree to share credit for a project, unless one doubts the other will actually follow through. In the Stag Hunt, trust is everything. Now contrast that with the chicken game. Imagine two drivers speeding toward each other on a narrow road. If one swerves and the other doesn't, the one who swerved is branded a chicken. They lose pride but avoid disaster. If neither swerves, both crash. If both swerve, the crash is avoided, but without the glory of standing firm. The game isn't about cooperation, it's about who blinks first. This standoff dynamic appears in trade wars, political showdowns, or even playground arguments. Each side wants to hold its ground, hoping the other gives in. But the longer the standoff, the greater the risk. The chicken game is about pride, bluffing, and brinkmanship. Sometimes winning isn't about outcomes, but about refusing to flinch. Together, these two games teach different lessons. The Stag Hunt shows that shared success relies on mutual confidence. Commit together and the rewards are high, but any doubt leads people to settle for less. The chicken game shows how pride and pressure can trap people in dangerous standoffs, where holding firm may look strong, but can end in disaster. Game theory models like these help us understand how people make choices in situations of trust or tension. They don't just simplify reality, they reveal the hidden patterns beneath it. And the clearer we see those patterns, the better we understand decisions in business, politics, or everyday life. What's the difference between zero-sum and non-zero-sum games? At its heart, the distinction is simple. In some situations, one person's gain must be another's loss, while in others, everyone can win or lose together. A zero-sum game is one where the total gains and losses are fixed. Whatever one player wins, another must lose in equal measure. The balance always adds up to zero. Classic examples are poker or sports. If one player walks away with $50 at the poker table, that money came directly from the other players. In a football match, one team's victory is automatically the other's defeat. These games are inherently competitive. Success comes only at someone else's expense. By contrast, non-zero-sum games allow outcomes where everyone can benefit or suffer together. The total payoff isn't fixed. It can grow, shrink, or shift depending on the choices made. Take two companies. If they compete fiercely, they may drive profits down for both. But if they collaborate, perhaps by splitting resources or entering different markets, both can achieve better results than by working alone. Or think of two roommates dividing chores. If they cooperate, both enjoy a cleaner apartment with less effort. If they refuse to clean, both lose. This difference has big implications. Zero-sum settings push people towards secrecy, competition, and aggressive strategies, because another's gain is your loss. Non-zero-sum situations, on the other hand, reward openness, trust, and collaboration, since helping others can also improve your own outcome. That's why people sometimes act generously in non-zero-sum games, not from pure selflessness, but because cooperation creates mutual benefit. Meanwhile, zero-sum thinking often drives short-term wins, but makes lasting collaboration difficult. Game theory uses this framework to analyze real-world choices, from business deals and trade agreements to climate negotiations and daily interactions. By recognizing whether a situation is zero-sum or non-zero-sum, players can better tailor their strategies, balancing competition with cooperation when it makes sense. When do we clash, and when do we cooperate? In game theory, the tension often comes down to trust versus self-interest. The best overall outcome usually requires trust, but the biggest individual reward often comes from breaking it. That's the dilemma at the heart of so many decisions. Each person must choose, protect themselves, or take a chance on someone else. The problem is that when everyone faces this choice, doubt spreads quickly. Even if cooperation would help everyone, no one wants to be the one left behind. You see this everywhere, in business, politics, and daily life. Two companies could both benefit by keeping prices stable, but if one slashes prices to win more customers, the other is forced to respond, and both end up worse off. Or take climate agreements. Two countries may promise to cut emissions, but if one cheats to boost its economy, the deal collapses for both. This dynamic is perfectly captured in The Prisoner's Dilemma, where two people could both do better by trusting each other, but self-interest tempts each to betray instead. What really matters in these situations isn't just the choice itself, but the context around it. Is this a one-time interaction, or will the same players meet again in the future? Are there systems in place to enforce trust, or does everything rely on good faith alone? These conditions shape whether people lean toward cooperation or self-protection. Game theory makes those structures visible. It explains why even smart, well-meaning people can fall into patterns that leave everyone worse off, and why those patterns keep repeating unless the rules of the game change. Where does fairness fit into strategy? Strategic decisions aren't only about outcomes. They're also about whether those outcomes feel fair. Even in situations where logic and self-interest usually dominate, fairness has surprising influence. Classic game theory assumes people focus on maximizing their own benefit. But in real life, people often walk away from deals that would help them if they believe the deal is unfair. Take the ultimatum game as an example. One player receives a sum of money and must offer a portion to the other. If the second player accepts, both keep the money. If they reject, neither gets anything. Pure logic says the second player should accept any amount above zero. After all, something is better than nothing. Yet, when the offer feels unfair, like only 10% of the total, many reject it outright, even at a cost to themselves. Why? Because rejecting an unfair deal isn't just emotional, it's strategic. It sends a message. If you treat me unfairly, I won't play along. This instinct shows up everywhere. In business, deals that feel lopsided often collapse. In teams, unequal credit or blame erodes trust. In politics, policies that seem unbalanced spark public backlash. Fairness doesn't just affect what people want. It shapes what they'll actually accept. That's why behavioral game theory blends strategy with psychology, recognizing that fairness, emotions, and social norms weigh as heavily as payoffs. People respond not only to outcomes, but also to how those outcomes are framed and whether they align with their values. And fairness doesn't always mean a 50-50 split. Sometimes it's judged by effort, risk, or context. But across cultures and situations, one truth remains. When people feel mistreated, they're often willing to sacrifice something just to make a point. That isn't bad strategy. It's a different kind of logic, one built on dignity, trust, and the long-term consequences of how we treat each other. Where does strategy show up in everyday life? Game theory isn't just for boardrooms, politics, or military standoffs. It's woven into daily life, often in ways we don't even notice. Even something as small as holding the elevator door or letting it close carries a layer of strategy. Take traffic. When merging lanes, you can either speed up or slow down. The right move depends not just on what you want, but on what you think the other driver will do. If they accelerate, you might back off. If they hesitate, you might slip in. That constant adjustment based on others' actions is strategy in motion. Relationships run on similar logic. Deciding when to apologize, when to push back, or when to let something slide often comes down to anticipating how the other person will react. Too much force risks damaging trust. Too much passivity can create imbalance. Over time, people learn this balance, blending strategy with emotion to keep connections stable. Even texting has a strategic layer. Do you reply right away, wait a while, or send a follow-up? Each choice depends on how you think the other person will interpret it. A delayed response might discourage someone. A quick one might encourage more engagement. It's a quiet game of signals. Workplaces are another arena. Should you step up and lead a project or back someone else's idea? Speak in a meeting or stay quiet? These choices aren't just about ambition. They're shaped by incentives, visibility, and how credit gets shared. Every move carries reputational risks and rewards. Shopping is also strategic. People weigh whether to buy now or wait for a sale, compare brands, or react to limited-time offers. Retailers design these scenarios deliberately, counting on customers to respond to pressure, scarcity, or the fear of missing out. How do businesses use strategy? Many businesses apply game theory principles without even realizing it. What they're really doing is using strategic thinking that mirrors those models, making decisions not only based on their own goals, but also on how competitors, customers, and partners are likely to respond. Companies don't operate in isolation. Every pricing change, marketing campaign, or product launch happens in a shared marketplace where actions ripple outward. For instance, if a grocery chain slashes the price of a best-selling item, competitors may feel forced to follow. If they don't, they risk losing customers. If they do, everyone's profits shrink. This isn't random. It's a cycle of prediction and counteraction, where each move depends on anticipating the next. Product launches work the same way. Tech firms racing to release new features face tough timing decisions. Launch too soon, and they risk flaws or poor reception. Wait too long, and rivals might steal market share. The decision hinges not just on internal readiness, but also on the competitor's clock. Marketing is equally strategic. One brand may release an emotional campaign, prompting another to pivot toward humor or practicality to stand out. These aren't just creative choices. They're calculated moves to position themselves against rivals. Sometimes strategy shows up as an action. If two big retailers avoid slashing holiday prices, it may look like cooperation, but it's often silent coordination. Both know starting a discount war would hurt them equally, so neither side blinks first. In the end, every action, or silence, sends a signal. Businesses learn from observing each other, adapt over time, and make decisions that help them survive and grow. Even if they never mention game theory, the underlying logic is there. Anticipate, respond, and try to shape the playing field in your favor. How do politics follow strategy? High-stakes political decisions, whether between nations, rival candidates, or coalition partners, can look chaotic from the outside. Yet beneath the surface, they often follow a strategic logic that game theory helps explain. When risks are enormous and outcomes uncertain, strategy becomes essential. Take international diplomacy. Countries rarely act alone. A sanction, a treaty, or an aid package isn't just about self-interest. It's about anticipating reactions. Tightening trade might trigger retaliation, while sending aid could be a way of building soft power. Each choice is part of an ongoing sequence where every side tries to stay a step ahead. One of the clearest examples is nuclear standoffs. Two armed rivals know that if one launches an attack, the other will retaliate, leading to mutual destruction. Neither wants to move first, creating a fragile but stable balance. In game theory, this mirrors the chicken game, where survival depends not on winning, but on swerving in time to avoid disaster. Strategy also shapes elections. Candidates don't just promote their own platforms. They adapt to what their opponents emphasize. If one party highlights the economy, another may pivot to social issues. A rising third-party candidate can even shift the entire debate. These moves aren't random. They're responsive strategies designed to anticipate and counter rivals. Inside governments, strategy plays out in coalition building. Leaders must balance competing demands, trade concessions, and preserve influence. It's less about total control and more about securing just enough leverage to push an agenda forward. Even public statements can be calculated tools. A leader may declare they won't intervene, not because it's entirely true, but because it buys time or reduces tension. At other times, a bluff is used to provoke a reaction. Both subtle and bold signals shape how others behave. How does nature play games? In the natural world, survival isn't only about strength or speed. It's also about making the right moves at the right time. Animals compete, cooperate, and adjust their behavior depending on what others around them are doing. These interactions aren't random. They follow recognizable patterns that biologists study through strategic thinking. This is where game theory connects with evolution. Animals don't consciously plan or calculate equations, but the same logic applies. Strategies that succeed are passed down through generations, while less effective ones gradually disappear. Over time, this process shapes behaviors that can be predicted and modeled. One clear example is competition for food. When two animals fight over a resource, both risk injury. If one backs down, it avoids harm but loses the prize. The most effective long-term strategy may involve a mix, sometimes fighting, sometimes yielding. This balance is captured in the hawk-dove game. Hawks always fight, doves always retreat. If every animal acted like a hawk, injuries would overwhelm the group. If all behaved like doves, resources would be taken too easily. But when both behaviors coexist, a natural balance emerges, not chosen, but shaped by evolution favoring strategies that maximize survival and reproduction. Cooperation offers another example. Some bird species take turns standing guard while others feed. At first, this looks selfless, but when everyone shares the role, each bird gains protection over time. If one refuses to participate, it may lose the group's support. The arrangement works like an unwritten contract. Cooperation benefits all, and freeloading is punished. Among primates, grooming reveals similar logic. One monkey grooms another not just for hygiene, but as a social trait. The favor is expected in return later. This tit-for-tat exchange helps build alliances and reduces conflict, strengthening group survival. Why view life as a game? Sometimes life feels less overwhelming when you stop taking every moment as deeply personal and start seeing it as part of a larger system. Viewing life as a kind of game, with players, rules, moves, and outcomes, can actually make decision-making clearer and reduce unnecessary stress. This perspective doesn't mean treating everything like a joke or a competition. It means recognizing that many situations follow patterns. People have goals, they respond to incentives, and they adjust based on what others do. Just like in any game, strategies are always at play, even if no one names them. Take the workplace, for example. A colleague may seem difficult or uncooperative, but if you look at the incentives they're reacting to, like pressure from their boss or the desire for a promotion, their actions make more sense. They're not simply stubborn. They're playing within a system that rewards certain moves. The same applies to relationships. Misunderstandings often arise from mismatched expectations or unclear rules. Seeing a relationship as a cooperative game highlights the importance of communication, trust, and reciprocity, strategies that sustain it over time. No one's keeping score, but both people want the interaction to continue. Even in high-pressure moments, like giving a presentation, negotiating a deal, or resolving an argument, this mindset can help. Remembering that others also have strategies, constraints, and goals allows you to step back, detach from raw emotion, and respond with more clarity. One of the biggest advantages of this view is healthy detachment, not in a cold or uncaring way, but enough to avoid overreacting. If a game doesn't go your way, you don't assume the universe is against you. You adjust your strategy. That shift reduces frustration and refocuses energy on what you can control. It also fosters flexibility. Good players don't rely on one rigid plan. They adapt as the game changes. Life's unpredictability feels less threatening when you expect it. Twists and turns don't knock you off balance because you've already accepted that the rules can shift. Seeing life as a game won't make it predictable or easy, but it does offer a framework, a mental model for making sense of behavior, managing expectations, and improving outcomes. By stepping back and noticing the patterns, you give yourself a clearer path forward. Not with perfect certainty, but with enough perspective to make smarter, more confident choices in a world that rarely comes with clear instructions. What's next for game theory? Game theory began with a simple goal: to understand how people make decisions when their outcomes depend on others. Over time, that purpose has expanded far beyond economics and strategy. Today, it's becoming a core part of how machines learn, how governments plan, and how complex systems adapt. The real question now isn't where game theory came from, it's where it's going. For decades, the field focused on clean, structured problems, a handful of players, fixed rules, and predictable choices. Those models explained auctions, negotiations, elections, and other well-defined scenarios. But real life is rarely so neat. People change their minds, new competitors emerge, and rules evolve. That's why the future of game theory is shifting toward models built to handle complexity, uncertainty, and constant change. One of the most exciting frontiers is artificial intelligence. Modern AI doesn't just follow instructions, it interacts. A self-driving car, for example, must navigate roads filled with human drivers, pedestrians, and other machines. It has to make real-time decisions with incomplete information and unpredictable behavior. That's not rigid programming, it's strategic reasoning. Researchers are now designing AI that learns and adapts like human decision-makers in ever-changing environments. Another fast-growing area is multi-agent systems, environments where many independent actors, people, software, or robots, make decisions that affect one another. From fleets of drones to decentralized financial networks, these systems demand coordination, negotiation, and conflict resolution. Future models of game theory are being built to track and balance hundreds or even thousands of players with overlapping or competing goals.